soul takes such a dislike to me and my sting, this may turn out better than I hoped. And anyway, it looks as if Stagrat, Gorbag, and the company have done nearly all my job for me. Except for that little frightened rat, I do believe there's nobody left alive in the place.
And with that he stopped, brought up hard, as if he had hit his head against the stone wall. The full meaning of what he had said struck him like a blow. Nobody left alive. Whose had been that horrible dying shriek?
Frodo! Master!
He cried, half sobbing.
If they've killed you, what shall I do? Well, I'm coming at last. Right to the top, to see what I must.
Up he went. It was dark, save for an occasional torch flaring at a turn, or beside some opening that led into the higher levels of the tower. Sam tried to count the steps, but after 200 he lost his reckoning. He was moving quietly now, for he thought that he could hear the sound of voices talking, still some way above. More than one rat remained alive, it seemed. All at once, when he felt that he could pump out no more breath, nor force his knees to bend again, the stair ended. He stood still. The voices were now loud and near. Sam peered about. He had climbed right to the flat roof of the third and highest tier of the tower, an open space, about 20 yards across, with a low parapet. There the stair was covered by a small domed chamber in the midst of the roof, with low doors facing east and west. Eastward, Sam could see the plain of Mordor vast and dark below, and the burning mountain far away. A fresh turmoil was surging in its deep wells, and the rivers of fire blazed so fiercely that even at its distance of many miles, the light of them lit the tower top with a red glare. Westward the view was blocked by the base of the great turret that stood at the back of this upper court and reared its horn high above the crest of the encircling hills. Light gleamed in the window slit. Its door was not 10 yards from where Sam stood. It was open, but dark, and from just within its shadow, the voices came. At first Sam did not listen. He took a pace out of the eastward door and looked about. At once he saw that up there the fighting had been fiercest. All the court was choked with dead orcs, or their severed and scattered heads and limbs. The place stank of death. A snarl, followed by a blow and a cry, sent him darting back into hiding. An orc voice rose in anger, and he knew it again at once, harsh, brutal, cold. It was Shagrat speaking, captain of the tower.
You won't go again, you say? Curse you, Snorker, you little maggot! If you think I'm so damaged that it's safe to flout me, you're mistaken. Come here and I'll squeeze your eyes out like I did to my blood just now. And when some new lads come, I'll deal with you. I'll send you to Salem.
They won't come. Not before you're dead, anyway.
Answered Snugger sullily.
I've told you twice that Gorbag's swine got to the gate first and none of yours got out. Lagdurf and Musgash ran through, but they were shot. I saw it from a window, I tell you, and they were the last.
Then you must go. I must stay here anyway. But I've heard Blackfish take that filthy rebel Gorbag.
Shagrat's voice trailed off into a string of foul names and curses.
I gave him better than Nico. He knifed me. You must go, or I'll eat you. You must get through to the pearls, or we'll both be for the black pits. Yes, you too. You won't escape by skulking here.
I'm not going down those stairs again.
Growled Snugger.
Are you captain or no? No. Keep your hands off your knife or I'll put an arrow in your guts. You won't be a captain long when they hear about all these goings on. I fought for the tower against those stinking awful rats. What a nice mess you two precious captains have made of things, fighting over the swag.
That's enough of you.
Snarled Shagrat.
My orders, it was Gorbag started.
Well, you put his back up. He's so high and mighty, and he had more sense than you anyway. He told you more than once that the most dangerous of these spies were still loose, and you wouldn't listen. And you won't listen now. Gorbag was right, I tell you. There's a great fighter about. One of those bloody-handed elves. One of those filthy dogs. He's coming here, I tell you. You heard the bell. He's gone past the watchers, and that's Tark's work. He's on the stairs, and until he's off them, I'm not going down. Not if you're a Nazgul, I wouldn't.
So that's it, is it?
yelled Shagrat.
You do this and you'll not do that. And when he does... Ready fast!
Out of the turret door, the smaller orc came flying. Behind him came Shagrat, a large orc with long arms that, as he ran crouching, reached to the ground, but one arm hung limp and seemed to be bleeding. The other hugged a large black bundle. In the red glare, Sam, cowering behind the stair door, caught a glimpse of his evil face as it passed. It was scored as if by rending claws and smeared with blood. Slaver dripped from its protruding fangs, the mouth snarled like an animal. As far as Sam could see, Shagrat hunted Snagga around the roof, until ducking and eluding him, the smaller orc with a yelp darted back into the turret and disappeared. Then Shagrat halted. Out of the eastward door, Sam could see him now, by the parapet, panting, his left claw clenching and unclenching feebly. He put the bundle on the floor, and with his right claw drew out a long red knife and spat on it. Going to the parapet, he leaned over, looking down into the outer court far below. Twice he shouted, but no answer came. Suddenly, as Shagrat was stooped over the battlement, his back to the rooftop, Sam, to his amazement, saw that one of the sprawling bodies was moving. It was crawling. It put out a claw and clutched the bundle. It staggered up. In its other hand it held a broad-headed spear with a short broken haft. It was poised for a stabbing thrust, but at that very moment a hiss escaped his teeth, a gasp of pain or hate. Quick as a snake, Shagrat slipped aside, twisting round, and drove his knife into his enemy's throat.
Got you, go back!
He cried.
Not quite dead, eh? Well, I'll finish my job now.
He sprang on the fallen body and stamped and trampled it in his fury, stooping now and again to stab and slash it with his knife. Satisfied at last, he threw back his head and let out a horrible gurgling yell of triumph. Then he licked his knife and put it between his teeth, and catching up the bundle, he came loping towards the near door of the stairs. Sam had no time to think. He might have slipped out of the door, but hardly without being seen, and he could not have played hide-and-seek with this hideous orc for long. He did what was probably the best thing he could have done. He sprang out to meet Shagrat with a shout. He was no longer holding the ring, but it was there, a hidden power, a cowing menace to the slaves of Mordor, and in his hand was Sting, and its light smote the eyes of the orc like a glitter of cruel stars in the terrible elf countries, the dream of which was a cold fear to all his kind. And Shagrat could not both fight and keep hold of his treasure. He stopped, growling, baring his fangs. Then, once more, orc fashion, he leapt aside, and as Sam sprang at him, using the heavy bundle as both shield and weapon, he thrust it hard into his enemy's face. Sam staggered, and before he could recover, Shagrat darted past and down the stairs. Sam ran after him, cursing, but he did not go far. Soon the thought of Frodo returned to him, and he remembered that the other orc had gone back into the turret. Here was another dreadful choice, and he had no time to ponder it. If Shagrat got away, he would soon get help and come back, but if Sam pursued him, the other orc might do some horrible deed up there. And anyway, Sam might miss Shagrat or be killed by him. He turned quickly and ran back up the stairs.
How long again, I expect?
He sighed.
It's my job to go right up to the top first. Whatever happens afterward.
Away below, Shagrat went leaping down the stairs and out over the court and through the gaze, bearing his precious burden. If Sam could have seen him and known the grief that his escape would bring, he might have quailed. But now his mind was set on the last stage of his search. He came cautiously to the turret door and stepped inside. It opened into darkness. But soon his staring eyes were aware of a dim light at his right hand. It came from an opening that led to another stairway, dark and narrow. It appeared to go winding up the turret along the inside of its round outer wall. A torch was glimmering from somewhere up above. Slowly Sam began to climb. He came to the glittering torch, fixed above a door on his left that matched a window slit looking out westward. One of the red eyes that he and Frodo had seen from down below by the tunnel's mouth. Quickly Sam passed the door and hurried on into the second story, dreading at any moment to be attacked and to feel throttling fingers seize his throat from behind. He came next to a window looking east and another torch above the door to a passage through the middle of the turret. The door was open. The passage dark, save for the glimmer of the torch and the red glare from outside flittering through the window slit. But here the stair stopped and climbed no further. Sam crept into the passage. On either side there was a low door. Both were closed and locked. There was no sound at all. muttered Sam.
After all my climb, this can't be the top of the tower. What can I do now?
He ran back to the lower story and tried the door. It would not move. He ran up again and sweat began to trickle down his face. He felt that even minutes were precious, but one by one they escaped, and he could do nothing. He cared no longer for Shagrat or Snugger, or any other orc that was ever spawned. He longed only for his master, for one sight of his face, or one touch of his hand. At last, weary and feeling finally defeated, he sat on a step below the level of the passage floor, and bowed his head into his hands. It was quiet, horribly quiet. The torch that was already burning low when he arrived sputtered and went out, and he felt the darkness cover him like a tide. And then softly, to his own surprise, there at the vain end of his long journey and his grief, moved by what thought in his heart he could not tell, Sam began to sing. His voice sounded thin and quavering in the cold, dark tower, the voice of a forlorn and weary hobbit, that no listening orc could possibly mistake for the clear song of an elven lord. He murmured old childish tunes out of the Shire, and snatches of Mr. Bilbo's rhymes that came into his mind like fleeting glimpses of the country of his home. And then suddenly new strength rose in him, and his voice rang out, while words of his own came unbidden to fit this simple tune. In western lands beneath the sun, in flowers there may rise in spring. The trees may bud, the waters run, the merry finches sing. Or there may be 'tis cloudless night, and swaying breeches bare, and elven stars as jewels white amid their branching hair. Though here at journey's end I lie, in darkness buried deep, beyond all towers strong and high, beyond all mountains steep, above all shadows rides the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. Beyond all towers strong and high, he began again, and then he stopped short. He thought that he had heard a faint voice answering him, but now he could hear nothing. Yet he could hear something, but not a voice. Footsteps were approaching. Now a door was being opened quietly in the passage above. The hinges creaked. Sam crouched down, listening. The door closed with a dull thud, and then a snarling orc voice rang out.
Hola, you up there, you damn little rat, stop your squeaking or I'll come and deal with you in your hair.
There was no answer.
All right,
Growled Snugger.
then I'll come and have a look at you all the same and see what you're up to.
The hinges creaked again, and Sam, now peering over the corner of the passage threshold, saw a flicker of light in an open doorway and the dim shape of an orc coming out. He seemed to be carrying a ladder. Suddenly the answer dawned on Sam. The topmost chamber was reached by a trapdoor in the roof of the passage. Snugger thrust the ladder upwards, steadied it, and then clambered out of sight. Sam heard a bolt drawn back.
You know, inquire, you'll pay for it. You've not got long to live in peace, I guess. But if you don't want the fun to begin right now, keep your trap shut, see? Here's a reminder for
There
you.
was a sound like the crack of a whip. At that, rage blazed in Sam's heart to a sudden fury. He sprang up, ran and went up the ladder like a cat. His head came out in the middle of the floor of a large round chamber. A red lamp hung from its roof. The westward window slit was high and dark. Something was lying on the floor by the wall under the window, but over it a black orc shape was straddled. It raised the whip a second time, but the blow never fell. With a cry, Sam leapt across the floor, sting in hand. The orc wheeled round, but before it could make a move, Sam slashed its whip hand from its arm. Howling with pain and fear, but desperate, the orc charged head down at him. Sam's next blow went wide, and thrown off his balance, he fell backwards, clutching at the orc as it stumbled over him. Before he could scramble up, he heard a cry and a thud. The orc, in its wild haste, had tripped on the ladder head and fallen through the trapdoor. Sam gave no more thought to it. He ran to the figure huddled on the floor. It was Frodo. He was naked, lying as if in a swoon on a heap of filthy rags. His arm was flung up, shielding his head, and across his side there ran an ugly whipweed.
Frodo! Mr. Frodo, my dear!
Cried Sam, tears almost blinding him.
It's Sam! I've come!
He half lifted his master and hugged him to his breast. Frodo opened his eyes.
Am I still dreaming?
He muttered.
But the other dream's horrible. You're not dreaming at all, Master.
Said Sam.
It's real. It's me. I've come. Oh, I can hardly believe it.
Said Frodo, clutching him.
There was an orc with a whip. And then it turns into Sam. But I wasn't dreaming after all. When I heard that singing down below and I tried to answer, it was you. It was indeed, Mr. Frodo. I've given up hope almost. I couldn't find you. Well, you have now, Sam. Dear Sam.
Said Frodo. And he lay back in Sam's gentle arms, closing his eyes like a child at rest, when night fears were driven away by some loved voice or hand. Sam felt that he could sit like that in endless happiness, but it was not allowed. It was not enough for him to find his master. He had still to try and save him. He kissed Frodo's forehead.
Come, wake up, Mr. Frodo,
he said, trying to sound as cheerful as he had when he had drew back the curtains at Bag End on a summer's morning. Frodo sighed and sat up.
Where are we? How did I get here?
He asked.
There's no time for tales till we get somewhere else, Mr. Frodo,
said Sam.
But you're at the top of that tower that you and me saw from far away, down by the tunnel before the orcs got you. How long ago that was, I don't know. More than a day, I guess. Only that,
said Frodo.
It seems weeks. You must tell me all about it if we get a chance. Something hit me, didn't it? And I fell into darkness and foul dreams. And woke that found that waking was worse. Orcs were all around me. I think they had just been pouring some horrible burning drink down my throat. My head grew clear, but I was aching and weary. They stripped me of everything. And then two great brutes came and questioned me. Questioned me until I thought I should go mad. Standing over me, gloating, fingering their knives. I'll never forget their claws and eyes. You won't if you talk about them, Mr. Frodo,
said Sam.
And if we don't want to see them again, the sooner we get going, the better. Can you walk? Yes. I can walk,
said Frodo, getting up slowly.
I am not hurt, Sam. Only I feel very tired, and I have a pain here.
He put his hand to the back of his neck above his left shoulder. He stood up, and it looked to Sam as if he was clothed in flame. His naked skin was scarlet in the light of the lamp above. Twice he paced across the floor.
That's better,
he said, his spirits rising a little.
I didn't dare move when I was left alone, or one of the guards came until the yelling and fighting began. The two big brutes, they quarreled, I think, over me and my things. I lay here terrified, and all went deadly silent. And that was worse. Yes, they quarreled, seemingly,
said Sam.
There must have been a couple of hundred of these dirty creatures in this place. A bit of a tall order from Sam Gamgee, as you might say. But they've done all the killing of themselves. That's lucky. But it's too long to make a song about it. Till we're out of here. Now what's to be done? You can't go walking in the Black Land with naught but your skin, Mr. Frodo. They've taken everything, Sam,
said Frodo.
Everything I had. Do you understand? Everything!
He cowered on the floor again with bowed head, as his own words brought home to him the fullness of the disaster, and despair overwhelmed him.
Even if we get out of here, we can't escape. Only elves can escape. Away out of Middle-earth, far away over the sea. If even that is enough to keep the shadow out.
No, not everything, Mr. Frodo. And it hasn't failed. Not yet. I took it, Mr. Frodo. Begging your pardon. And I've kept it safe. It's round my neck now. And a terrible burden it is, too. Sam fumbled for the ring and its chain. But I suppose you must take it back. Now it has come to it. Sam felt reluctant to give up the ring and burdened his master with it again. You've got it, gasped Frodo. You've got it. Sam, you're a marvel. Then quickly and strangely his tone changed. Give it to me, he cried, standing up, holding out a trembling hand. Give it to me at once. You can't have it! All right, Mr. Frodo, said Sam, rather startled. Here it is. Slowly he drew the ring out and passed the chain over his head. But you're in the land of Mordor now, sir. When you get out, you'll see the fiery mountain and all. You'll find the ring very dangerous now and very hard to bear. If it's too hard of a job, I could share it with you, maybe. No! No! Cried Frodo, snatching the ring and chain from Sam's hands. No, you won't! You thief! He panted, staring at Sam with eyes wide with fear and enmity. Then suddenly clasping the ring in one clenched fist, he stood aghast. A mist seemed to clear from his eyes, and he passed a hand over his aching brow. The hideous vision had seemed so real to him, half bemused as he was still with wound and fear. Sam had changed before his very eyes into an orc again, leering and pawing at his treasure, a foul little creature with greedy eyes and slobbering mouth. But now the vision had passed. There was Sam kneeling before him, his face wrung with pain as if he had been stabbed in the heart. Tears welled from his eyes. Oh, Sam, cried Frodo. What have I said? What have I done? Oh, forgive me. After all you've done, it is a horrible power of the ring. I wish it had never been found. But don't mind me, Sam. I must carry the burden to the end. It can't be altered. You can't come between me and this doom. That's all right, Mr. Frodo, said Sam, rubbing his sleeve across his eyes. I understand. But I can still help, can't I? I've got to get you out of here. At once, see? But first, you want some clothes and gear and then some food. The clothes will be the easiest part, as we're in Mordor, we'd best dress up Mordor fashion. And anyway, there isn't no choice. It'll have to be orc stuff for you, Mr. Frodo, I'm afraid. And for me too, if we go together. We'd best match. Now put this round you. Sam unclasped his grey cloak and cast it about Frodo's shoulders. Then, unslinging his pack, he laid it on the floor. He drew Sting from his sheath. Hardly a flicker was to be seen upon its blade. I was forgetting this, Mr. Frodo. No, they didn't get everything. You lend me Sting, if you remember, and the lady's glass. I've got them both still. But lend them to me a little longer, Mr. Frodo. I must go and see what I can find. You stay here. Walk about a bit and ease your legs. I shan't be long. I shan't have you go far. Take care, Sam, said Frodo. And be quick. There may be orcs still alive, lurking in wait. I've got to chance it, said Sam. He stepped to the trapdoor and slipped down the ladder. In a minute, his head reappeared. He threw a long knife on the floor. There's something that might be useful, he said. He's dead, the one that whipped you. Broke his neck, it seems, in his hurry. Now you draw up the ladder if you can, Mr. Frodo, and don't you let it down till you hear me call the password. Elbereth, I'll call. What the elves say, no orc would say that. Frodo sat for a while and shivered, dreadful fears chasing one another through his mind. Then he got up, drew the grey elven cloak about him, and to keep his mind occupied, began to walk to and fro, prying and peering into every corner of his prison. It was not very long, though. Fear made it seem an hour at least before he heard Sam's voice calling softly from below. Frodo let down the light ladder. Up came Sam, puffing, heaving a great bundle on his head. He let it fall with a thud. Quick now, Mr. Frodo, he said. I've had a bit of a search to find anything small enough for the likes of us. We'll have to make do. But we must hurry. I've met nothing alive, and I've seen nothing, but I'm not easy. I think this place is being watched. I can't explain it, but, well, it seems to me as if one of those foul flying riders was about. Up in the blackness where he can't be seen. He opened the bundle. Frodo looked in disgust at the contents, but there was nothing for it. He had to put the things on, or go naked. There were long hairy breeches of some unclean beast fell, and a tunic of dirty leather. He drew them on. Over the tunic went a coat of stout ring mail, short for a full-sized orc, too long for Frodo, and heavy. About it he clasped a belt, at which there hung a short sheath, holding a broad-bladed stabbing sword. Sam had brought several orc helmets. None of them fitted Frodo well enough. A black cap with iron rim and iron hoops covered with leather upon which the evil eye was painted in red above the beak-like nose guard. The Morgul stuff, Gorbag's gear, was a better fit and better made, said Sam. But it won't do, I guess, to go carrying his tokens into Mordor. Not after this business here. Well, there you are, Mr. Frodo. A perfect little orc, if I may make so bold. At least you would be, if we could cover your face with a mask. Give you longer arms and make you bow-legged. Still, this will hide some of the telltales. He put a large black cloak around Frodo's shoulders. Now you're ready. You can pick up a shield as we go. What about you, Sam? Said Frodo. Aren't we going to match? Well, Mr. Frodo, I've been thinking, said Sam. I'd best not leave any of my stuff behind, and we can't destroy it. And I can't wear orc mail over all my clothes, can I? I'll just have to cover up. He knelt down and carefully folded his elven cloak. It went into a surprisingly small roll. This he put into his pack and lay on the floor. Standing up, he slung it behind his back, put an orc helm on his head, and cast another black cloak about his shoulders. There, he said. Now we match. Near enough. And now we must be off. I can't go all the way at the run, Sam, said Frodo with a wry smile. I hope you've made inquiries about inns along the road. Or have you forgotten about food and drink? Save me, but so I had, said Sam. He whistled in dismay. Bless me, Mr. Frodo, but you've gone and made me that hungry and thirsty. I don't know when drop or morsel had last passed my lips. I'd forgotten it, trying to find you. But let me think. Last time I looked, I've got enough of that whey bread and of what Captain Faramir gave us to keep me on my legs for a couple of weeks at a pinch. But if there's a drop left in my bottle, there's no more. That's not going to be enough for two, nohow. Don't orcs eat? And don't they drink? Or do they just live on foul air and poison? No, they eat and drink, Sam. The shadow that bred them can only mock. It cannot make. Not real new things on its own. I don't think it gave life to the orcs. It only ruined them and twisted them. And if they are to live at all, they have to live like other living creatures. Foul waters and foul meats they'll take if they can get no better. But not poison. They fed me, and so I'm better off than you. There must be food and water somewhere in this place. But there's no time to look for 'em, said Sam. Well, things are a bit better than you think, said Frodo. I've had a bit of luck while you were away. Indeed, they did not take everything. I found my food bag among some rags on the floor. They rummaged it, of course, but I guess they disliked the very look and smell of the lembas. Less than Gollum did. It's scattered about, and some of it's trampled and broken, but I've gathered it together. It's not far short of what you've got, but they've taken Faramir's food and they've snatched up my water bottle. Well, there's no more to be said, said Sam. We've got enough to start on, but the water's going to be a bad business. But come, Mr. Frodo. Off we go, or a whole lake of it won't do us any good. Not till you've had a mouthful, Sam, said Frodo. I won't budge. Here, take this elven cake and drink the last drop of your bottle. The whole thing is quite hopeless, so it's no good worrying about tomorrow. It probably won't come. At last they started. Down the ladder they climbed, and then Sam took it and laid it in the passage behind the huddled body of the fallen orc. The stair was dark, but on the rooftop the glare of the mountain could still be seen, though it was dying down now to a sullen red. They picked up 2 shields to complete their disguise, and went on. Down the great stairway they plodded. The high chamber of the turret behind, where they had met again, seemed almost homely. They went out in the open gate now. Then terror ran along the walls. All might be dead in the tower of Cirith Ungol, but it was steeped in fear and evil still. At length they came to the door upon the outer court, and they halted. Even from where they stood they felt the malice of the watchers beating on them, black and silent shapes on either side of the gate, through which the glare of Mordor dimly showed. As they threaded their way among the hideous bodies of the orcs, each step came more difficult. Before they even reached the archway, they were brought to a stand. To move an inch further was a pain and weariness to will and limb. Frodo had no strength for such a battle. He sank to the ground.
I cannot go on, Sam. I cannot go on, Sam.
He murmured.
I'm going to faint. I don't know what's come over me. I do, Mr. Frodo. Hold up now. It's the gate. There's some devilry there, but I got through, and I'm going to get out. It can't be more dangerous than before. Now for it!
Sam drew out the elven glass of Galadriel again, as if to do honour to his hardihood and to grace with splendour his faithful brown hobbit hand that had done such deeds. The phial blazed forth suddenly, so that all the shadowy court was lit with a dazzling radiance like lightning. But it remained steadily, and did not pass. Sam cried, for why he did not know. His thoughts sprang back suddenly to the elves in the Shire, and the song that drove away the Black Rider in the trees. Cried Frodo once again behind him. The will of the Watchers was broken with a suddenness like the snapping of a cord, and Frodo and Sam stumbled forward. Then they ran, through the gate and past the great seated figures with their glittering eyes. There was a crack. The keystone of the arch crashed almost on their heels, and the wall above crumbled and fell in ruin. Only by a hair did they escape. A bell clanged, and from the watchers there went up a high and dreadful wail. Far above in the darkness it was answered. Out of the black sky there came dropping like a bolt a winged shape, rendering the clouds with a ghastly shriek. Sam had just wits enough left to thrust the phial back into his breast.
Run, Mr. Frodo!
He cried.
No, not that way! There's a sheer drop over the wall! Follow me!
Down the road from the gate they fled. In 50 paces, with a swift bend round a jutting bastion of the cliff, it took them out of sight from the tower. They had escaped for the moment. Cowering back against the rock, they drew breath, and then they clutched at their hearts. Perching now on the wall beside the ruined gate, the Nazgul sent out its deadly cries. All the cliffs echoed. In terror they stumbled on. Soon the road bent sharply eastward again and exposed them for a dreadful moment to view from the tower. As they flitted across, they glanced back and saw the great shape upon the battlement. Then they plunged down between high rock walls and a cutting that fell steeply to join the Morgul road. They came to the way meeting. There was still no sign of orcs, nor of an answer to the cry of the Nazgul, but they knew that the silence would not last long. At any moment now, the hunt would begin.
This won't do, Sam,
said Frodo.
If we were real orcs, we ought to be dashing back to the tower, not running away. The first enemy to beat will know us, and we must get off this road somehow. But we can't,
said Sam.
Not without wings.
The eastern faces of the Ethel Duath were sheer, falling in cliff and precipice to the black trough that lay between them and the inner ridge. A short way beyond the way meeting, yet another steep incline, a flying bridge of stone leapt over the chasm and bore the road across into the tumbled slopes and glens of the Morgai. With a desperate spurt, Frodo and Sam dashed along the bridge. But they had hardly reached its further end when they heard the hue and cry begin. Away behind them, now high above on the mountainside, loomed the tower of Cirith Ungol, its stones glowing dully. Suddenly its harsh bell clanged again, and then broke into a shattering peal. All sounded, and now, from beyond the bridge end came the answering cries. Down in the dark trough, cut off from the dying glare of Rodruin, Frodo and Sam could not see ahead, but already they heard the tramp of iron-shod feet, and upon the road there rang the swift clatter of hoofs.
Quick, Sam! Over we go!
Cried Frodo. They scrambled on to the low parapet of the bridge. Fortunately, there was no longer any dreadful drop into the gulf, for the slopes of the Morgai had already risen almost to the level of the road. But it was too dark for them to guess the depth of the fall.
Well, here goes, Mr. Frodo,
said Sam.
Goodbye.
He let go. Frodo followed, and even as they fell they heard the rush of horsemen sweeping over the bridge and the rattle of orc feet running up behind. But Sam would have laughed if he had dared. Half fearing a breaking plunge down into the unseen rocks, the hobbits landed, in a drop of no more than a dozen feet, with a thud and a crunch into the last thing they had expected. A tangle of thorny bushes. There Sam lay still, softly sucking a scratched hand. When the sound of hoof and foot had passed, he ventured a whisper.
Bless me, Mr. Frodo, but I didn't know as anything grew in Mordor. But if I had known, this is just what I've looked for. These thorns must be a foot long by the feel of them. They've stuck through everything I've got on. I wish I'd have put a mail shirt on. Oh, mail doesn't thorns out,
said Frodo.
Not even a leather jacket is in.
They had a struggle to get out of the thicket. The thorns and briars were as tough as wire and as clanging as claws. Their cloaks were rent and tattered before they broke free at last.
Now down we go, Sam.
Frodo whispered.
Down into the valley quick, and then turn northward as soon as ever we can.
Day was coming again in the world outside, and far beyond the glooms of Mordor the sun was climbing over the eastern rim of Middle-earth. But here, all was still dark as night. The mountain smouldered, and its fires went out. The glare faded from the cliffs. The easterly wind that had been blowing ever since they left Ithilien now seemed dead. Slowly and painfully they clambered down, groping, stumbling, scrambling among rock and briar and dead wood in the blind shadows, down and down until they could go no further. At length they stopped and sat side by side, their backs against a boulder. Both were sweating.
If Shagrat himself was to offer me a glass of water, I'd shake his hand,
said Sam.
Don't say such things,
said Frodo.
It only makes it worse.
Then he stretched himself out, dizzy and weary, and he spoke no more for a while. At last, with a struggle, he got up again. To his amazement, he found that Sam was asleep.
Wake up, Sam,
he said.
Come on. It's time we made another effort.
Sam scrambled to his feet.
Well, I never,
he said.
I must have dropped off. Oh, it's a long time, Mr. Frodo, since I had a proper sleep, and my eyes just closed down on their own.
Frodo now led the way, northward as near as he could guess, among the stones and boulders lying thick at the bottom of the great ravine. But presently he stopped again.
It's no good, Sam,
he said.
I can't manage it. This mail shirt, I mean. Not in my present state. Even my mithril coat seemed heavy when I was tired. This is far heavier. Now, what's the use of it? We can't win through by fighting, but we may have some more to do.
Said Sam.
And there's knives and stray arrows. That golem isn't dead for one thing. I don't like to think of you with naught but a bit of leather between you and a stab in the dark. Look here, Sam, dear lad,
said Frodo.
I am tired, weary. I haven't a hope left. But I have to go on trying to get to the mountain, as long as I can move. The ring is enough. This extra weight is killing me. It must go. But don't think I'm ungrateful. I hate to think of the foul work you must have had among the bodies to find it for me. Don't talk about it, Mr. Frodo, bless you. I'll carry you on my back if I could. Let it go then.
Frodo laid aside his cloak and took off the oak mail and flung it away. He shivered a little.
What I may need is...
He said.
It's gone cold. Or else I've caught a chill. You can have my cloak, Mr. Frodo.
Said Sam. He unslung his pack and took out the elven cloak.
How's this, Mr. Frodo?
He said.
You wrap that orc rag close around you and I'll put the belt outside it. Then this can go over all. It don't look quite orc fashion, but it'll keep you warmer. And I dare say it'll keep you from harm better than any other gear. It was made by the lady.
Frodo took the cloak and fastened the brooch.
That's better.
He said.
I feel much lighter. I can go on now. But this blind dog seems to be getting to my heart. As I lay in prison, Sam, I try to remember the Brandywine and Woody End and the water running through the mill at Hobbiton. But I can't see them now. There now, Mr. Frodo, it's you that's talking of water this time,
said Sam.
If only the lady could see us or hear us, I'd say to her, Your ladyship, all we want is light and water. Just clean water in plain daylight, better than any jewels, begging your pardon. But it's a long way to Lorien.
Sam sighed and waved his hand toward the heights of the Efelduath, now only to be guessed as deeper blackness against the black sky. They started off again.
Come, Mr. Frodo. Come on.
They had not gone far when Frodo paused.
There's a black rider over us. What?
He said.
I can feel it. We had better keep still for a while.
Crouched under a great boulder, they sat facing back westward, and did not speak for some time. Then Frodo breathed a sigh of relief.
It's past,
he said. They stood up, and then they both stared in wonder. Away to their left southward, against a sky that was turning grey, the peaks and high ridges of the Great Range began to appear dark and black. Visible shapes. Light was growing behind them. Slowly it crept towards the north. There was battle far above in the high spaces of the air. The billowing clouds of Mordor were being driven back, their edges tattering as a wind out of the living world came up and swept the fumes and smokes towards the dark land of their home. Under the lifting skirts of the dreary canopy, dim light leaked into Mordor like pale morning through the grimed shadow of a prison.
Look at it, Mr. Frodo,
said Sam.
Look at it. The wind's changed. Something's happening. He's not having it all his own way. His darkness is breaking up out in the world there. Oh, I wish I could see what's going on.
It was the morning of the 15th of March, and over the Vale of Anduin, the sun was rising above the eastern shadow, and the southwest wind was blowing. Theoden lay dying on the Pelennor fields. As Frodo and Sam stood and gazed, the rim of light spread all along the line of the Efelduath, and they saw a shape, moving at a great speed out of the west, at first only a black speck against the glimmering strip above the mountain tops, but growing, until it plunged like a bolt into the dark canopy and passed high above them. As it went, it sent out a long, shrill cry, the voice of a Nazgul, but this cry no longer held any terror for them. It was a cry of woe and dismay. Ill tidings for the Dark Tower. The Lord of the Ringwraiths had met his doom.
What did I tell you? Something's happening,
cried Sam.
The war's going well, said Shakra. But Gorbek, he wasn't so sure. And he was right there, too. Things are looking up, Mr. Frodo. Haven't you got some hope now? Well, no. Not much, Sam.
Frodo sighed.
That's away beyond the mountains. They're going east, or west. And I'm so tired. And the ring is so heavy, Sam. And I begin to see it in my mind. All the time. It's like a great wheel of fire.
Sam's quick spirits sank again at once. He looked at his master anxiously, and he took his hand.
Come, Mr. Frodo,
he said.
I've got one thing I wanted. A bit of light.
enough to help us. And yet I guess it's dangerous too. Try a bit further, and then we'll lie close and have a rest. But take a morsel to eat now. And a bit of that elf's food, it may hearten you. Sharing a wafer of limbus and munching it as best they could with their parched mouths, Frodo and Sam plodded on. The light, though no more than a grey dusk, was now enough for them to see that they were deep in the valley, between the mountains. It sloped up gently northward, and at its bottom went the bed of a now dry and withered stream. Beyond its stony course they saw a beaten path that wound its way under the feet of the westward cliffs. Had they known, they could have reached it quicker, for it was a track that left the main Morgul road at the western bridge end and went down by a long stair cut in the rock to the valley's bottom. It was used by patrols or by messengers going swiftly to lesser posts and strongholds north or west between Cirith Ungol and the narrows of Eisenmouth, the iron jaws of Carach Angren. It was perilous for the hobbits to use such a path, but they needed speed, and Frodo felt that he could not face the toil of scrambling among the boulders or its trackless glens of the Morgai. And he judged that northward was, maybe, the way that their hunters would least expect them to take. The road east to the plain, or the pass back westward. Those they would first search most thoroughly. Only when he was well north of the tower did he mean to turn and seek for some way to take him east. East to the last desperate stage of his journey. So now they crossed the stony bed and took to the Orc path, and for some time they marched along it. The cliffs at their left were overhung, and they could not be seen from above. But the path made many beds, and at each bend they gripped their sword hilts and went forward cautiously. The light grew no longer, for Orodruin was still belching forth a great fume that, beaten upwards by the opposing airs, mounted higher and higher until it reached a region above the wind and spread in an immeasurable roof, whose central pillar rose out of the shadows beyond their view. They had trudged for more than an hour when they heard a sound that brought them to a halt. Unbelievable, but unmistakable. Water trickling. Out of a gully on the left, so sharp and narrow that it looked as if the black cliff had been cloven by some huge axe, water came dripping down. The last remains, maybe, of some sweet rain gathered from sunlit seas, but ill-fated to fall at last upon the walls of the black land and wander fruitless down into the dust. Here it came out of the rock in a little falling streamlet, and flowed across the path, and turning south, ran away swiftly to be lost among the dead stones. Sam sprang towards it.
I see the lady again, I will tell her.
He cried.
Light and now water.
He then stopped.
Let me drink it first, Mr. Frodo.
He said.
All right, but there's room enough for two. Oh, I didn't mean that.
Said Sam.
I mean, well, if it's poisonous or something that will show its badness quick, well, better me than you, Master, if you understand me. I do, but I think we'll trust our luck together, Sam, or our blessing. Still, be careful now if it's very cold.
The water was cool, but not icy, and it had an unpleasant taste. At once bitter and oily, or so they would have said at home. Here it seemed beyond all praise, and beyond fear or prudence. They drank their fill, and Sam replenished his water bottle. After that, Frodo felt easier, and they went on for several miles, until the broadening of the road and the beginnings of a rough wall along its edge warned them that they were drawing near to another Orc hold.
This is where we turn aside, Sam,
said Frodo.
We must turn east.
He sighed as he looked at the gloomy ridges across the valley.
I have just about enough strength left to find some hole away up there. And then I must rest a little.
The riverbed was now some way below the path. They scrambled down to it, and began to cross it. To their surprise, they came upon dark pools, fed by threads of water trickling down from some source higher up the valley. Upon its outer marges under the westward mountains of Mordor was a dying land, but it was not yet dead. And here things still grew, harsh, twisted, bitter, struggling for life. In the glens of the Morgai on the other side of the valley, low scrubby trees lurked and clung. Coarse grey grass tussocks fought with the stones and withered mosses scrawled on them. and everywhere great writhing tangled brambles sprawled. Some had long stabbing thorns, some hooked barbs that rent like knives. The sullen shriveled leaves of a past year hung on them, grating and rattling in the sad airs. But their maggot-ridden buds were only just opening. Flies, dun or grey or black, marked like oars with a red eye-shaped blotch, buzzed and stung. And above the briar thickets, clouds of hungry midges danced and reeled.
More gear's no good,
said Sam, waving his arms.
I wish I'd got Nork's hide.
At last Frodo couldn't go no further. They had climbed up a narrow shelving ravine, but they still had a long way to go before they could even come in sight of the last craggy ridge.
I must rest now, Sam, and sleep if I can,
said Frodo. He looked about, but there seemed nowhere even for an animal to crawl in this dismal country. At length, tired out, they slunk under a curtain of brambles and hung down like a mat over a low rock face. There they sat and made such a meal as they could, keeping back the precious lembas for the evil days ahead. They ate half of what remained in Sam's bag of Faramir's provision, some dried fruit and a small slip of cured meat, and they sipped some water. They had drunk again from the pools in the valley, but they were very thirsty again. There was a bitter tang in the air of Mordor that dried the mouth. When Sam thought of water, even his hopeful spirit quailed. Beyond the Morgai was the dreadful plain of Gorgoroth to cross.
Now you go to sleep first, Mr. Frodo,
he said.
It's getting dark again. I reckon this day is nearly over.
Frodo sighed and was asleep almost before the words were spoken. Sam struggled with his own weariness, and he took Frodo's hand. And there he sat silent, till deep night fell. Then at last, to keep himself awake, he crawled from the hiding place and looked out. The land seemed full of creaking and cracking and sly noises, but there was no sound of voice or of foot. Far above the Ephel Duath, in the west, the night sky was still dim and pale. There, peeping among the cloud rack above a dark tor, high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of the forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft, clear and cold, the thought pierced that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. His song in the tower had been defiance rather than hope, for then he was thinking of himself. Now, for a moment, his own fate and even his master's ceased to trouble him. He crawled back into the brambles and laid himself by Frodo's side. Then putting away all fear, he cast himself into a deep, untroubled sleep. They woke together hand in hand. Sam was almost fresh, ready for another day. But Frodo sighed. His sleep had been uneasy, full of dreams of fire, and waking brought him no comfort. Still, his sleep had not been without all healing virtue. He was stronger, more able to bear his burden one stage further. They did not know the time, nor how long they had slept, but after a morsel of food and a sip of water, they went on up the ravine, until it ended in a sharp slope of screes and sliding stones. There at last, living things gave up their struggle. The tops of the Morgai were grassless, bare, jagged, barren as a slate. After much wandering and searching, they found a way that they could climb. And with a last 100 feet of clawing scramble, they were up. They came to a cleft between two dark cracks, and passing through found themselves on the very edge of the last fence of Mordor. Below them, at the bottom of a fall of some 1,500 feet, lay the inner plain stretching away into a formless gloom beyond their sight. The wind of the world blew now from the west, and the great clouds were lifted high, floating away eastward, but still only a grey light came to the dreary fields of Gorgoroth. There smokes trailed on the ground and lurked in hollows, and fumes leaked from fissures in the earth. Still far away, 40 miles at least, they saw Mount Doom. Its feet founded in ashen ruin, its huge cone rising to a great height, where its reeking head was swathed in cloud. Its fires were now dimmed, and it stood in smouldering slumber, as threatening and dangerous as a sleeping beast. Behind it there hung a vast shadow, ominous as a thundercloud, the veils of Barad-dûr that was reared far away upon a long spur of the Ashen Mountains, thrust down from the north. The dark power was deep in thought, and the eye turned inward, pondering tidings of doubt and danger. A bright sword in the stern kingly face it saw, and for a while it gave little thought to other things. And all its great stronghold, gate on gate, and tower on tower, was wrapped in brooding gloom. Frodo and Sam gazed out in mingled loathing and wonder on this hateful land. Between them and the smoking mountain, and about it north and south, all seemed ruinous and dead. A desert burned and choked. They wondered how the lord of this realm maintained and fed his slaves and his armies. Yet armies he had. As far as their eyes could reach, along the skirts of the Morgai and away southward there were camps. Some of tents, some ordered like small towns. One of the largest of these was right below them. Barely a mile out into the plain it clustered like some huge nest of insects, with straight dreary streets of huts and long low drab buildings. About it the ground was busy with folk going to and fro. A wide road ran from its southeast to join the Morgul Way, and along it many lines of small black shapes were hurrying.
I don't like the look of things at all.
Said Sam.
Pretty hopeless, I call it. Saving that where there's such a lot of folk, there must be wells of water. Not to mention food. And these are men, not orcs. My eyes are all wrong.
Neither he nor Frodo knew anything of the great slave-worked fields away south in this wide realm, beyond the fumes of the mountain by the dark sad waters of Lake Nurnen, nor of the great roads that ran away east and south to tributary lands, from which the soldiers of the tower brought long wagon trains of goods and booty and fresh slaves. Here in the northward regions were the mines and forges, and the musterings of long-planned war. And here the dark power, moving its armies like pieces on the board, was gathering them together. Its first moves, the first feelers of its strength, had been checked upon its western line, southward and northward. For the moment it withdrew them, and brought up new forces, massing them about Cirith Gorgor for an avenging stroke. And if it had also been its purpose to defend the mountain against all approach, it could scarcely have done more.
Well,
Sam went on.
whatever they have to eat and drink, we can't get it. There's no way down that I can see. And we couldn't cross all that open country crawling with enemies even if we did get down. Still, we shall have to try,
said Frodo.
It's no worse than I expected. I never hoped to get across. I can't see any hope of it now. But I've got to do the best I can. At present, that is to avoid being captured as long as possible. So we must still go northwards, I think, and see what it is like where the open plain is narrower. I guess what it'll be like,
said Sam.
Where it's narrower, the orcs and men will just be packed closer. You'll see, Mr. Frodo. I dare say I shall if we ever get so far,
said Frodo, and turned away. They soon found that it was impossible to make their way along the crest of the Morgai, or anywhere along its higher levels, pathless as they were and scored with deep gills. In the end, they were forced to go back down the ravine that they had climbed, and seek for a way along the valley. It was rough going, for they dared not cross over to the path on the westward side. After a mile or more they saw, huddled in a hollow at the cliff's foot, the orc hold that they had guessed was near at hand, a wall and a cluster of stone huts set about the dark mouth of a cave. There was no movement to be seen, but the hobbits crept by cautiously, keeping as much as they could to the thorn brakes that grew thickly at this point along both sides of the old watercourse. They went 2 or 3 miles further, and the orc hold was hidden from sight behind them. But they had hardly begun to breathe more freely again when, harsh and loud, they heard orc voices. Quickly they slunk out of sight behind a brown and stunted bush. The voices drew nearer. Presently 2 orcs came into view. One was clad in ragged brown and was armed with a bow of horn. It was of a small breed, black-skinned with wide and snuffling nostrils. Evidently a tracker of some kind. The other was a big fighting orc, like those of Shagrat's company, bearing the token of the eye. He also had a bow at his back and carried a short, broad-headed spear. As usual, they were quarreling, and being of different breeds, they used the common speech after their fashion. Hardly 20 paces from where the hobbits lurked, the small orc stopped. It snarled.
I'm going home.
It pointed across the valley to the orc hold.
No good wearing my nose out on stones anymore. There's no trace left, I say. I've lost the scent through giving away to you. It went up into the hills, not along the valley, I tell you. Not much use are you, you little snufflers?
Said the big orc.
I reckon eyes are better than your snotty noses. Then what have you seen with them?
Snarled the other.
Well, you don't even know what you're looking for. Whose blame's that?
Said the soldier.
Not mine. That comes from higher up. First they say it's a great elf in plate armor, then it's a sort of small dwarf man. Then it must be a pack of rebel Uruk-hai. Or maybe it's all the lot together.
Said the tracker.
They've lost their heads, that's what it is. And some of the bosses are going to lose their skins too, I guess. If what I hear is true. Tower raided and all, and hundreds of your lads done in and prisoner got away. If that's the way your fighters go on, small wonder there's bad news from the battles. Who says there's bad news? Who says there isn't? That's cursed rebel talk, and I'll stick you if you don't shut it down, see? All right,
Said the tracker.
I'll say no more and go on thinking. But what's the black snake got to do with it all, that gobbler with the flapping hands? I don't know. Nothing, maybe. But he's up to no good nosing around, I'll wager. Curse him! No sooner had he slipped us and run off than word came he's wanted alive. Wanted quick. Well, I hope they get him and put him through it.
Growled the tracker.
He messed up the scent back there, pinching that cast-off metal shirt that he found and paddling all around the place before I could get there. Well, it saved his life anyhow.
Said the soldier.
Why? Before I knew he was wanted, I shot him as neat at 50 paces, right in the back, but he ran on. Ah, you missed him.
Said the tracker.
First you shoot wild, then you run too slow, and then you send for the poor trackers. I've had enough.
He loped off.
You come back!
Shouted the soldier.
Or I'll report you! Hell, not your precious Shagrat. He won't be captain anymore. I'll give your name and number to the law school.
Said the soldier, lowering his voice to a hiss.
One of them's in charge of the tower now.
The other halted, and his voice was full of fear and rage.
You cursed bitch and sneakface!
He yelled.
You can't do your job and you can't even sneak by your own folk. Kill your filthy shriekers and may they freeze the flesh off you if the enemy doesn't get them first. They've done in number 1, I've heard. And I hope it's true.
The big orc, spear in hand, leapt after him, but the tracker, springing behind a stone, put an arrow in his left eye as he ran up, and he fell with a crash. The other ran off across the valley and disappeared. For a while the hobbit sat in silence. At length Sam stirred. He said,
If this friendliness would spread about in Mordor, half our trouble would be over. Quietly, Sam.
Frodo whispered.
There may be others about. We have evidently had a very narrow escape, and the hunt was hotter on our tracks than we guessed, but that is the spirit of Mordor, Sam, and it has spread to every corner of it. Orcs have always behaved like that, so all the tales say when they were on their own. You can't get much hope out of it. They hate us far more. together and all the time. If those two had seen us, they would have stopped all their quarrel until we were dead.
There was another long silence. Sam broke in again, but with a whisper this time.
Did you hear what they said about that gobbler, Mr. Frodo? I told you Gollum wasn't dead yet, didn't I? Yes, I remember. I wondered how you knew,
said Frodo.
Well, come now. I think we'd better not move out from here again until it has gone quite dark. So you shall tell me how you know and all about what happened. If you can do so quietly. I'll try,
said Sam.
But when I think of that stinker, I get so hot I could shout.
There the hobbit sat under the cover of the thorny bush, while the drear light of Mordor faded slowly into a deep and starless night. And Sam spoke into Frodo's ear all that he could find words for Gollum's treacherous attack, the horror of Shelob, and his own adventures with the orcs. When he had finished, Frodo said nothing, but took Sam's hand and pressed it. At length he stirred.
Well, I suppose we must be going on again,
He said,
I wonder how long it will be before we really are caught. And all the toilings and the slinking will be over. And in vain.
He stood up.
It's dark and we cannot use the lady's glass. Keep it safe for me, Sam. I have nowhere to keep it now except in my hand. And I shall need both hands in the bloody night. That sting I give to you. I have got that oak blade, but I do not think that it be my part to strike any blow again.
It was difficult and dangerous moving in the night in the pathless land. But slowly and with much stumbling the two hobbits toiled on hour by hour, northward along the eastern edge of the stony valley. When the grey light crept back onto the western heights, long after day had opened in the lands beyond, they went into hiding again. And slept a little, turn by turn. In his times of waking, Sam was busy with thoughts of food. At last, when Frodo roused himself and spoke of eating and making ready for yet another effort, he asked the question that was troubling him most.